Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Time for the October Q&A. Got Tim with me, of course, and we have a lot of different interesting questions to get through. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and the new Duranaut high-performance thermal paste. Duranaut offers extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity, and this has been achieved through a specially engineered silicon oil combined with aluminium microparticles and zinc oxide nanoparticles of various shapes. Duranaut isn't electrically conductive and won't harden over time. For best performance, you'll want to apply a very thin layer, and to help with this, included is the TG Spatula Pro. The spatula's revised design allows for increased pressure during application, making it easy to spread a thin, even layer of Duranaut. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Alright, have you seen the latest RAM pricing insanity? I guess now that the GPU market is somewhat stable and CPUs have been going strong, it's RAM's turn to be the next magical AI fairy dust. So have you seen this situation?
Yeah, it sort of came out of nowhere, I feel like. Like I was checking our Discord community and people were talking about memory prices suddenly getting crazy. And I was like, I feel like it was normal like a couple of weeks ago. Then I checked like Newegg and all those websites and I'm like, whoa, yeah, there's been a real impact here. And then you made your video recently doing the 1440p build, and
that's what I noticed.
Yeah, you had to talk about it there.
I missed a bit of the discussion around it. Anyway, I when I organized the memory, I made sort of a price list, roughly what I was targeting, and I thought $90-ish for DDR5 6000 CL30 32GB kit. That's really good. That stuff used to be expensive. It's been about that price for a better part of a year now.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, might as well go that. There's no point really saving $20 or whatever to get, higher latency memory. That stuff's great. Locked that in. Admittedly, it was probably about 4 weeks before I got to finishing the video off because we had so much other stuff pop up, like, Borderlands 4, Battlefield 6, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, went to check the memory prices and I had to do a double take because I'm like, well, keep showing me the wrong memory. This stuff's like $200, $250. What's going on?
Is it DDR4? The wrong filter?
And anyway, I couldn't quite work out what was going on. I went and looked at the pricing history and then I saw that the prices had spiked up. And I did recall, I think when I was going through the news, maybe on TechSpot, reading about DRAM prices expect to increase because of demand from the server markets, or they're shifting production towards server stuff, which I think is driven by AI, of course. And anyway, that's the reason. So yeah, DDR4, DDR5 desktop memory pricing has skyrocketed, and that is because the manufacturers, the producers of DRAM, are focusing their efforts towards HBM and then server DDR memory. And they're doing that probably because they can make much more money off that memory, and the demand for that memory has increased due to the AI stuff. So I'm sure the AI stuff's seen some uptick in DDR5 sales, the more desktop-oriented memory. But I think the main driving force behind the price increase there is the fact that there is less production now. So
yeah, of the physical DRAM chips that go onto the modules that you would buy for desktop systems.
Mobile phones use them, all that sort of stuff. So
yeah, that's right.
Anything that uses those chips now is going to increase in price because supply is no longer meeting demand.
Yeah, and so I did a bit of research into what specifically in the AI market was causing it, because it doesn't really make sense that AI servers would just be going and buying desktop RAM, for example. It seems to be there's been a lot of deals lately, and you might have seen some of the channels, I think Gamers Nexus did a video on a lot of these circular AI deals that have been happening where OpenAI, one of the biggest AI companies, is trying to build out server capacity, so they're making deals with AMD and Intel and Nvidia to do all of that. And there's been a lot of these package deals, I guess, done to build out gigawatts of server capacity. For some reason, they use gigawatts, I guess, because they're talking about the power consumption of these servers. But anyway, they've made all these deals that they're trying to get this done in 2026, for example. So previously, I think a lot of the server infrastructure builds were based on longer time frames. They were just going, we're going to keep building server infrastructure for AI over time. It's going to be a big demand factor. Now, all of these deals really hinge on things getting done at certain time frames. We want to build a certain number of gigawatts by this date. And so the memory manufacturers have seen this and have gone, well, there's going to be all this demand in 2026 for DRAM because all those deals hinge on supply of these servers. And so that's why they're focusing on that sort of thing. So I think you'll see anything that servers could use be impacted in that way. So I imagine there might be some graphics impacts depending on how, the GPU manufacturers allocate their silicon supply to different things. It may not impact things like CPUs and things like that, motherboards, but yeah, certainly the components that can be supply constrained in that way, you're probably going to see impacts because of this. The other factor, though, is whether or not those servers actually do get built. There's a lot hinging on those circular deals. It's quite strange and seems a potential for those deals to fall over. So it's really unclear at the moment how long these things are going to be impacted for, whether, if the AI bubble keeps going, then the impact will be a long time. But if some of those deals start falling over because the finances don't work and the deals were too circular, for example, then yeah, it may be a different scenario. But it seems like all of this is sort of picked up very recently as those deals have been announced. So it seems to make a lot of sense in that front.
All right, due to price changes for the RAM, is there a future ahead where we pair an X3D part with lower quality DDR5? I haven't done any updated testing for quite a while, but we do know that the 3D V-cache parts are less memory sensitive than the standard Zen 4, Zen 5, and even when you go back to the DDR4 generation stuff, Zen 3 and all that. So memory is less of an issue there. I'm not saying it's not an issue altogether, but typically speaking, you don't have to go as aggressive with your memory when you're getting an X3D part because the large L3 cache sort of minimizes the need to access the memory as much. And yeah, we've seen that with previous testing. I wouldn't just say, it doesn't matter at all. Like just use any memory with an X3D CPU. You're going to see the same level of performance because that's not the case at all. But it's not as memory sensitive. That's really the most accurate way I can put it. It's not as memory sensitive as the non-3D V-cache parts, but ideally you still want to sort of try and find the sweet spot memory. And now, like I consider DDR5 6000 CL30 to be the sweet spot because, as I said, it was like $90, $95, whereas the cheaper stuff was, $70. So it was a very, very small cost increase to get sort of that optimal experience. Now it's more like $200. So I'd say that's no longer the sweet spot. What the current sweet spot is, I'm not sure. I haven't really reinvestigated all the memory prices because memory prices are volatile at the best of times and they're extremely volatile right now.
Yeah, I think the issue will be, as you're talking about sort of a $20 difference between like the base memory and the sweet spot memory, that could still be the case now under this new demand scenario. It's just that it's $200 versus $180 or whatever the price difference will end up. Because if they're just using all of the supply to make server DRAM or whatever, then it's not going to really matter too much because server DRAM, my understanding is they don't typically use like the super high performance 6000 stuff. They're really sticking to more base spec level things because obviously it's a binning thing, right? Like they make the dies, then they choose, that's the better quality stuff that will go into, the 6000 low latency stuff, but then the cheaper stuff gets the worst bins. But if it's all going to AI, then it's just going to be a supply issue across the board.
Yeah, basically you'll be pairing your X3D CPU like all other CPUs with the memory that makes sense, like makes the most sense. So what that ends up being is not quite sure at this point in time, but you just have to check pricing and yeah, whether it's CL30, CL40, whatever it ends up being, it'll be determined by the price.
Yeah. As a 4090 owner, the NVIDIA 50 series and AMD 90 series thus far are about as interesting as watching paint dry. Okay. Realistically, do you expect anything like a 5090 Super Ti in the mid-cycle refreshes, or am I likely waiting for the next-gen parts? So currently there's no rumors suggesting there'll be a 5090 refresh. I think across the Super series, we're going to largely see from the 5070 to 5080. So probably three models there: 5070 Super, 5070 Ti Super, and then the 5080 Super. The 5090 Super, the demand for the 5090 still seems to be pretty good. There's no real competition for that part either, so there's not a strong incentive to make an even faster model because anyone after the fastest GPU is just buying the 5090 anyway. There is a little bit of silicon room. The 5090 is not a fully unlocked part, so they could theoretically slightly increase it like you would have seen from 4080 to 4080 Super sort of thing, maybe some slight overclocks and that sort of thing. They could also use 3 gigabyte memory modules to give you more VRAM on that card. I just don't think they're going to be doing that. Those fully unlocked parts, the best quality silicon is going to the Pro Blackwell series. So the Pro, the RTX 6000 or whatever it's called, the flagship model of that, which is a very expensive GPU. That's where all that silicon is going. So yeah, I don't think we'll see too much movement on the 5090. If there was like a competing AMD part, maybe we would see something like that. But as you point out in the question, if you have a 4090, there's no real 90 series AMD part that's of interest. So yeah, I just don't think this will be happening this generation. And it didn't happen last generation either, when the 4090 was clearly the best GPU as well. But it did happen the previous generation when the 3090 was much closer to the sort of best other GPUs at the time from AMD. So yeah, I think that's really the dictating factor for that one.
All right, Tim, do you think all this craziness with AI that skyrocketed the prices of RAM and SSDs will evolve to something like crypto did with GPUs? So I suppose the question's asking, like, well, we've seen RAM prices pretty well double overnight for some particular RAM anyway. I've saw reports of it being 15 to 20% up, but I've certainly seen much more on that, much more than that on the kits that we look at. So are we expecting RAM and SSDs to, like, is it going to cost you $1,000 for 32 gigabytes of RAM, for example?
I mean, I'd hope not. I think with the crypto thing that happened the previous time that happened, well, the most recent time, it was kind of a combination of factors. One of them was also the increase in gaming demand around that time, just because everyone was inside due to COVID. So we sort of had the crypto thing happening and an increase in gaming demand, which sort of made everything just come together at the same time, which was pretty unfortunate. But then as well, crypto was so profitable at that time that GPUs could very easily go up by $1,000, and it would still make sense for crypto miners to buy those products. Whereas what we're facing with the DRAM situation is a little different, because it does depend on what they're selling DRAM to for server markets. So if the server market hasn't gone up by 10x, then you wouldn't really expect the desktop market to, because then they would just be selling to the desktop market for way more than they're selling to the server market. So if you see server applications buying it for double the price, then you'd expect the desktop RAM to get double the price, right? But are servers getting 5 times more expensive to make? I think that probably throws out a lot of the economic viability of building those servers. So while they've certainly gone up in price, not to that level. Like, it may not be profitable anymore if memory was $1,000 instead of $200 to build that out across all the servers that they're trying to do. It might exceed the deals and budgets that they've made, which it's a very different sort of market to the crypto stuff, where again, like, you could just throw in a GPU and it would start making way more than the GPU was worth very quickly. And even home users were doing that. Like, you see people buying 4 or 5 GPUs, putting them into a system and trying to make money in their own house. Whereas you're not really seeing that with like people building their own AI servers for their house, at least in the scale that's impacting the supply. So yeah, I don't want to say it's not going to happen and it's not going to become $1,000, but it is kind of a different scenario and situation. And we're not really seeing the increase in gaming demand at the same time. Like, gaming is pretty flat at the moment in terms of demand. Like, you haven't really seen the COVID era happen again. People are just sort of going pretty normal on that front.
Should resale value be considered when purchasing a GPU? The 4090 FE is, for example, still selling above MSRP, and so is the 5090 FE used. So I don't know if that applies to all models, or there's just an unbelievable demand for the Founders Edition models. Not sure. But regardless, should it be considered? I think when it's more of a guarantee, then sure. I don't know how much of a consideration, or like, you put it in sort of this column, like why I would buy this over this product or whatever. And how do you know that one product is going to hold its value better than another product? Again, really hard to say, because they could bring in, a 5080 Super that quickly smashes down the price of like a 4090, for example. I'm certainly not suggesting that would happen, but those things can shift at a given moment. So the resale value is more like when you're going to resell it, and yeah, there's so many variables at play. It's kind of a gamble. So I don't know if it's a consideration, because I'm not really sure if it's something you can plan for in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I think like for specific models, it's pretty hard to sort of say like, oh, as you said, like a 5080 is going to hold its value better than a 5070, and you're going to get more of a percentage back. Because I think we're probably talking about percentages, not dollar value, right? Because 5080 is obviously a high value product, so you'd be hoping to get more of a dollar value back than a 5070 if you sold it. But percentage wise, it could be very difficult to tell. I think there's a few sort of maybe more smaller scale things that do impact the resale value. One of the things that we have noticed obviously is higher VRAM capacity at the same performance tier. So over the years, if you look at, I think back to 3070 versus 2080 Ti, the 2080 Ti's held their value better because they had 11 gig instead of 8 gig of VRAM. And we've seen similar with like 4060 Ti, 8 versus 16 as well. So if there were sort of those two models that you were tossing up between, then one of the reasons why, because with a 16 gig card, for example, they're not necessarily faster in today's games if the VRAM is not a concern. But one of the things that may put you over the edge a little bit there is going, well, I could probably get back a little bit more selling this when the lifespan of that card is up.
Yeah, because in 3 years, the 16 gigabyte model is still going to be perfectly usable. Or at least not have as many headaches trying to work around, what settings to use and stuff like that, which makes them more desirable. And so, and we've seen that as a real thing, that there's a real effect there that happens where people see that as being more of a worthwhile investment opposed to the 8 gigabyte cards. And you saw it with like 4080s and 5080s, so the Radeon RX series. The 8 gigabyte cards were much more desirable and held their value better than the 4 gigabyte models. Whereas at launch, the 4 gigabyte card was technically better value. It just depended on how long you kept it for and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's great if you buy a really expensive bit of tech and when you're happy to upgrade or whatever, then, because saying a 5090 still at MSRP, well, not really shocking, is it? Because you wouldn't expect to lose much money on a current generation product that's still the best product, even if it is used. Like, you just get the usual used discount.
Especially because I think 5090s, how likely are you to find one of those at MSRP new? Like, it's pretty unlikely. I think the used market also tends to follow more closely with the performance of the products. So if there are outlier products, usually on the bad side, so like I'm thinking RTX 5050, for example, is sort of much worse value than a lot of the other 50 series cards. That's probably going to drop in value much more quickly than the other models, simply because on the used market, people just weigh it up, right? They're like, I'll spend 20% more to get 20% more performance. So if on the new market, it's 10% more performance for 30% more price, is very quickly going to drop down on the used market. And then I think maybe what this question was alluding to as well is that the Founders Edition models specifically, as opposed to some of the AIB cards, do keep their value better just because the design is more desirable. Some people like to collect the Founders Edition cards more than, say, like an MSI Supreme model or whatever. So that can improve resale value. You typically do see, at least when we were tracking used sales a couple of years ago, that the Founders Editions were worth quite a bit more. Similar sort of things you can see with like the limited edition designs that come out for certain, franchises. White models tend to hold their value a little better as well because people looked for a white model to pair with their system. And then on the reverse of that, you see cards sold with water blocks and water cooling tend to lose their value because people are buying them for more budget systems is kind of what the used market's for. So if you had a water block or some sort of complex thing that would make it hard to put into a system, requires like new coolers and that sort of thing put on, then you're going to lose value on that. So those are the sorts of things you can sort of slightly predict a little bit what may happen. But if you're sort of going like the 5080 will hold its value better than a 5070, like you can't really predict that easily. So yeah.
Do you think direct storage is another failed Microsoft technology? It's not advertised anymore with any new or future games.
Interesting phrasing in that question when it says another failed Microsoft tech. What other failed Microsoft technologies are they talking about? Like none really come to, like DirectX is pretty successful, isn't it?
Maybe they just mean projects or...
like Xbox, right? Which is could be seen as a failed project. Now, console war people can get mad about that.
Well, You know more about this than I do. Like Microsoft phones, they were a thing for a while.
Right, yeah, Windows Phone,
Yeah, the Windows Phone. Like, is that? I think
That's a
they
failed
still
project.
exist.
Skype is a failed project. Windows is a sorry, not quite a failed project yet. Go watch the podcast for more thoughts on that.
Yeah. So anyway,
they've screwed up a fair few things, haven't they?
Didn't they do like an MP3 player as well? To, like,
the
compete?
Zune.
Yeah, and that didn't really. I don't know. I forget now. There's that many.
Yeah, they love to botch things.
So the question was bang on. Why
MSN
why
Messenger,
questioning the question?
into Skype, anyway.
Tim would like to apologise to the person who asked that question because they were bang on.
No, maybe none of that stuff was gaming related, but so direct storage. I guess this question has come about because it's just not advertised much anymore. Like, it was kind of talked about as a feature similar to like a ray tracing or frame generation, and then no one really talked about it anymore. But that doesn't mean it's not being used. You can look at the Steam, I think Steam charts websites, one of them has, the direct storage SDK list. So you can look at all the games that use the direct storage SDK. And there are plenty of games that have come out this year, last year, that use it. So one of the big ones that you're probably familiar with, Battlefield 6, is a direct storage game, uses the SDK. You can look at very recent releases. I think like Ninja Gaiden 4 is one of them. Assassin's Creed Shadows earlier this year. Jurassic World Evolution 3. There's many others. A lot of the ones that are ported from the PlayStation 5, so like your Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima, all those games use direct storage as well. So
did Ratchet and Clank use it?
I believe so.
Did.
That was one of the early ones. That was when a lot of people were testing it out as a feature, because it was one of the first titles, so people were sort of benchmarking the impact then. But yeah, it's very much still used, but unlike something like ray tracing or frame generation, Microsoft doesn't bother advertising DirectX features or any of their gaming features. Like, you don't really hear them talking about, hey guys, play this latest title that uses mesh shaders from our DirectX suite. Like, they don't really care. That's really on the game like telling game developers what things they have in their toolbox to use. Whereas NVIDIA, they're trying to sell you graphics cards. So that's why you hear so much more about like ray tracing and frame generation and stuff. Microsoft doesn't sell you graphics cards, so they don't care. That's really it, I think. So you're going to see many more direct storage games. They're still being in development. They're still coming out. It's just not this crazy feature and it's really sort of seamless thing. Like, you don't really think like, do I want to turn on or off direct storage? It's just in the games. And I think you look at a Battlefield 6, for example, which runs really well. It's not like you're like, oh, I wish I could turn off direct storage in that game because it's hurting my performance or whatever. Like, the performance is good enough. So you're kind of happy with it, I think. Following your recent reports about the lower CPU overhead of Radeon drivers compared to GeForce drivers and the fact that many stutters are CPU related, have you noticed any difference in the level of stuttering between GPUs, especially when paired with lower tier CPUs?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the NVIDIA overhead stuff that we looked at probably years ago now, it is very game specific. So Radeon GPUs generally use less of your CPU in DirectX 12 titles, where the inverse is true for DirectX 11. So look, if you have a low end CPU and you've got sort of a higher end, more modern GPU, whether it be a 9060 XT or 5060 Ti, if it is a very old, slow CPU that you probably should upgrade, you will get a better experience with the Radeon GPU, typically higher frame rates. And yeah, stuff like stuttering will be part of that because whenever the CPU is maxed out, which is what we're talking about here, you have about 20% more headroom with a Radeon GPU for select DirectX 12 titles. You'll avoid stuttering because the CPU is overwhelmed and you're having to wait for the CPU to do a thing before the GPU can do its thing, which causes stuttering and slowdowns. But yeah, as I sort of pointed out when we did that testing, it's not something that you generally have to be too concerned with. It is exclusively a problem for those of you with very entry level, very budget PCs. So maybe if you have like still a Ryzen 5 1600 or 2600 and you've upgraded to a newer GPU, you will get better performance. Typically speaking, with a Radeon GPU, though. We haven't done that much updated testing. We did sort of see the overhead issue a bit in Battlefield 6 multiplayer, but didn't investigate that too much. Not enough to really make any concrete conclusions. But yeah, when your CPU's overwhelmed, that's when you'll start to see degraded performance, and usually stuff like stuttering will occur. And that is going to do it for part 1 of this month's Q&A series. That was an enjoyable Q&A session, I found.
Yeah. Do you reckon one time we'll say it was unenjoyable?
maybe. I don't rule it out. We could. Have we had an unenjoyable one?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
We need to spice it up a little bit.
yeah, there's still a possibility for that to occur. So anyway, this one unfortunately wasn't an enjoyable one.
Unfortunately.
Well, it's just a regular enjoyable
Right,
Q&A.
yeah. Okay.
So just usual sort of programming. I'm looking forward now to the unenjoyable one because I want to see what that looks like. And I'm sure everyone else does now.
Yeah, maybe instead of choosing the upvoted questions, we choose right from the bottom of the ones that there was no engagement on.
I don't think that would be unenjoyable though because there are some good
possibly.
ones down there. And they could be fun.
Possibly.
So I don't know what an unenjoyable Q&A looks like.
Yeah. Mystery.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Anyway, I suppose we should wrap this up. We do have the join button or Patreon if you want to become a Hardware Box member. You get access to our Discord server where you can ask Tim about monitor names.
It's been some shockers lately, so
I think you might have even done a video about it.
I did.
It was actually more why they were bad, not specific monitor
Well,
names,
it was they were bad, and I'm sick of this, and here's the reason why they're bad.
Okay, well, if you want to hear those reasons, go to Monitors Unboxed, and it's one of the latest videos. Again, there's the Discord server, live streams, behind the scenes content, Q&A stuff. Check it out if you're interested. If not, perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this Q&A series. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim. See you next one.